Actually got a member of the media from Yahoo Sports that is acknowledging the two owners of Unrivaled that are on the committee are absolutely causing a conflict of interest. Not only is it a conflict of interest, it is extremely bad and poor optics.
That's not just media commentary. That's a journalist finally saying what everyone's been thinking for months. Yahoo Sports just broke ranks with the rest of the WNBA media establishment to call out something that should have been obvious from day one. Breanna, Stewart, and Napheesa Collier are negotiating against the league they're trying to compete with, and somehow nobody wanted to talk about it until now.
Of the idea of the conflict of interest between Napheesa Collier and Breanna Stewart and the interest of Unrivaled may not necessarily aligning with the interest of the W.
Well, Fee and Stewie are not only WNBA players, they are on the executive committee. So as is Kelsey Plum, she's playing in Unrivaled. 3 of the 7 people on that board who can now vote for a strike are part of Unrivaled. That is not necessarily a bad thing. I think the thing about conflict of interest, though, is just the simple fact that you as a person have interests that conflict with one another. Yeah. The key thing is just keeping in mind that is...
Let's break down exactly what we're dealing with here. 3 of the 7 people on the WNBA Players Association Executive Committee who can vote to authorize a strike are directly involved with Unrivaled. Stewart and Collier founded the league. Kelsey Plum is playing in it and has equity. These aren't just players with overseas contracts. They own a competing basketball league that benefits if the WNBA goes dark. The math is simple. The executive committee voted to authorize a strike over a CBA proposal. That same committee rejected salary increases that would have given players 9 times their current pay. And the people making these decisions? They're running a startup league that needs the WNBA schedule cleared to survive.
Facts of it are Fee and Stewie run this league that makes them money. There are players who played in the first season who have equity in the league who are able to make money off of this league, right? And that's the thing, is just to keep it in mind that these are 2 different things. If we want to go all the way back, like players have been playing overseas the entirety of the WNBA. That is also a conflict of interest because, as we know, the schedules overlap. You have to make decisions, all of these kinds of things. But to say that there is no conflict of interest is absolutely ridiculous, because there is.
Of course there is. You can say that you'll take your personal interest out of something, but we're all human, right? Like, these biases exist. You can't always totally and completely take maybe a...
Here's what makes this particularly problematic. The journalist nails it when she says you can't completely remove personal interest from these decisions. She's right. These biases exist whether you acknowledge them or not. Stewart and Collier can say they're compartmentalizing their business interests from their union responsibilities, but that's not how human psychology works. Think about what's at stake for them personally. Unrivaled just completed its first season with minimal buzz, no major stars outside the founder's circle, and a format that hasn't caught fire with fans. Meanwhile, Project Rock, the Ice Cube-backed league, is positioning itself as direct competition. If the WNBA goes on strike, Unrivaled suddenly has an opportunity to pivot, expand, maybe shift to 5-on-5 traditional basketball while the established league is shut down.
Is it a concern of yours, though?
It's always going to be a concern of mine, no matter what we're talking about. And I say this, like, obviously as a journalist, right? Like, this is kind of the number one thing. So I always am concerned that it becomes a part of it. You know, I would hope when you're talking about Stewie and Fee that they understand that as well and can compartmentalize that just like athletes do for anything. But it is certainly a part of these talks, and it cannot be over.
And this is where it gets uncomfortable for everyone involved. The journalist specifically mentions she's always concerned about conflict of interest because that's journalism 101. It's the first thing you learn. But where has that concern been from everyone else covering this leak? ESPN's coverage has read like press releases from the Players Association. Articles framing every owner position as greedy, every player demand as justified, every union move as heroic. Nobody's asked the obvious question. Why are the co-founders of a competing league in charge of deciding whether the WNBA shuts down for a season?
Wow. So what is this called? Hoops 360 podcast from Yahoo Sports. Cassandra Negley and Caroline Fenton. Bravo for having the guts to go out there as members of the media and just say it. She said, is there a conflict? Absolutely. Of course there is. And none of these other media members got the guts to say a thing about it. Not a thing. It's been one of the most embarrassing parts of anything related to these negotiations and how they're trying to conduct business is the fact that the media silence is deafening on this one major issue. And understand, if somebody like me and somebody like them sits back here and bangs the table that this is a huge conflict of...
Now, let's talk about what the owners are thinking right now. Put yourself in their position. You're negotiating with a union that's authorized to strike. The proposal on the table would cost the league $700 million, according to financial projections. You're offering salary increases that would multiply current pay by 9 times, and sitting across from you are people who literally own a business that competes for the same players, the same sponsors, the same television slots. How do you negotiate in good faith when you know the people on the other side have a financial incentive for your league to fail? How do you trust that their rejection of your offer is about fair compensation and not about creating an opening for their own venture? This isn't speculation. This is basic business logic. If I own a restaurant and I'm negotiating with the restaurant across the street about shared parking and their owner is on the neighborhood committee deciding parking rules, everyone would recognize that as a problem. But in the WNBA, we're supposed to pretend it's fine.
How do you think the owners feel about it? How do you think they feel about it? They're sitting back going, wait a minute. These people are on the committee. Hell, the president is now playing for Project B. And they can authorize a strike? You know, I think the WNBA Players Association better be careful of one thing. Because what happens when the owners say, let's lock them out for the hell of it? Let's lock them out to send them a loud and clear message. Let's not only lock them out, but tell them you're not getting that revenue sharing, period.
Here's the nuclear option nobody's talking about yet. What happens if the owners decide to lock out the players instead of waiting for a strike? Just shut it down. Send a message and tell the Players Association that revenue sharing is off the table entirely. No negotiation, no compromise, just we're cutting our losses and moving on. Suddenly, that imaginary picket line becomes very real. And you're going to find out quickly who's actually committed to union solidarity and who's willing to cross that line for a 9-time salary increase. Players like Caitlin Clark and Paige Buchers aren't stupid. They see this conflict of interest. They understand that Stewart and Collier have motivations beyond getting the best deal for all WNBA players. The question becomes, if there's a lockout, who breaks first? Who decides that their personal financial future matters more than standing with the union? Because I guarantee you, not everyone is willing to sacrifice their career to protect Unrivaled's business interests.
And then one of the most fascinating parts of all this is who would step across that line. Because you're going to get some players that are like, oh no, bump that shit. I'm taking a 9-time salary increase. We're going to find out real fast who is aligned and who's not. Oh, but they voted for a strike. Yeah. But if there's a lockout, they have to cross an imaginary picket line at that point. Who gonna cross it? And look, somebody like Caitlin Clark, Caitlin Clark's not stupid. She's not stupid at all. She knows them being involved is a conflict of interest. Sophie Cunningham, I promise you, she knows them being involved is a conflict of interest. Those two ladies are not dumb. We can listen to...
And this is what makes the media silence so damning. The journalist from Yahoo Sports mentions that, as a reporter, conflict of interest is always her number one concern. That's professional integrity. That's doing your job. But where's that same energy from everyone else? The WNBA media landscape has been dominated by agenda-driven coverage that prioritizes social messaging over basic journalism. Nobody wants to ask hard questions because it might disrupt the narrative. Nobody wants to point out that having competing league owners negotiate your union contract is insane because it might make the players look bad. But this isn't about making anyone look bad. This is about basic fairness and transparency. The owners deserve to negotiate with people who are actually focused on WNBA compensation, not people who are thinking about how to position their own league for success if the WNBA implodes.
But they also don't have, and they're also not ate up with a bunch of social agenda nonsense like the majority of these players and the media. That's something, by the way, the players and the media have in common, is their agenda. Oh my God, look at us, we're gay and proud, and all that mess. Hey, bravo. Hoops 360, bravo. Great job. I know you're ladies, but bravo on showing a pair. I think WNBA media would appreciate that. Peace, I'm out. Till next time.
So let's bring this full circle and talk about what happens next. Because this conflict of interest isn't going away. It's going to be part of every single negotiation session, every proposal, every counteroffer. The owners know it. The players know it. And now, finally, at least one media outlet is willing to say it out loud. Breanna Stewart and Napheesa Collier are in an impossible position. They can't serve two masters. They can't advocate for maximum WNBA salaries while also running a league that needs the WNBA to fail in order to capture market share. Those interests are fundamentally opposed. The smart move would have been to recuse themselves from the executive committee the moment Unrivaled launched. Let other players handle the CBA negotiations. Focus on building their business without this cloud of suspicion hanging over every decision. But they didn't do that. They stayed in their union leadership positions. They voted to authorize a strike, and they rejected proposals that would have dramatically increased player compensation. Maybe they genuinely believe they're acting in the best interests of all WNBA players. Maybe they think they can compartmentalize their business interests from their union responsibilities. But perception matters in negotiations, and right now the perception is that the people deciding whether the WNBA shuts down have a competing league waiting in the wings. The Yahoo Sports journalists deserve credit for breaking ranks and stating the obvious. Cassandra Negley and Caroline Fenton from the Hoops 360 podcast did what the rest of the WNBA media should have done months ago. They asked a simple question: isn't this a conflict of interest? And when pressed, they gave the only honest answer: of course it is. Now, the question is whether anything changes. Will other media outlets start asking the same questions? Will the Players Association address this obvious problem? Will Stewart and Collier step back from CBA negotiations to eliminate even the appearance of impropriety? Or will everyone just pretend this isn't an issue and hope it goes away, because that's been the strategy so far? Ignore the conflict. Attack anyone who brings it up. Frame any criticism as anti-player or anti-women's sports. But this isn't about being anti-player. This is about basic governance and ethics. You can't negotiate against a league while simultaneously owning a competing league. That's not complicated. That's not controversial. That's just common sense. And if the WNBA Players Association wants to be taken seriously in these negotiations, they need to address it. Remove the conflict. Put people in charge of CBA talks who don't have a financial stake in the WNBA's failure. Prove that these negotiations are about fair compensation, not about creating opportunities for Unrivaled, because right now, the owners have every reason to be skeptical. They're being asked to commit $700 million to a league while negotiating with people who own a competing business. That's not a recipe for good faith negotiation. That's a recipe for a lockout, a legal battle, and a complete breakdown of the relationship between players and ownership. So, here's my question for you. If you were an owner, would you trust this negotiating committee? Would you believe that Stewart and Collier are putting the WNBA first when they have millions of dollars invested in a league that directly competes for players, sponsors, and attention? Let me know in the comments, because this conflict isn't going away, and it's going to define how these CBA negotiations play out over the next few months.